Hi, everybody. Welcome to the live today. I'm so happy to be back. It's been probably 2 weeks since I've done a live, and I have missed you all. So I'm back, and I can't wait to talk to you guys today about our topic, which is 3 reasons why you should choose open adoption. Now, the conversation between open and closed adoption is something that can weigh a lot on adoptive families when you're trying to decide that. Some families think that closed adoption is just the right way to go because they think when I adopt this child, it's my child. Other families, after getting more information about open adoption, they decide that, what, open adoption is really good. It's going to be good for my child. It's going to be good for the biological family. And I do want to keep my heart open to that. So in this live today, we're going to talk about 3 reasons why it's really important for you to choose open adoption. So I have with me today Kathryn Russell. I'm going to bring her on here in just a minute. But Kathryn Russell is a licensed social worker, and she has served as the director of Absolute Love Adoptions, which is a Pennsylvania licensed nonprofit agency since 2016. So she has a lot of experience with adoption. She's also a former doula and a self-proclaimed birth junkie, and she's the creator of Solace gift boxes for birth mothers, which we'll talk about a little bit during the live today, and the digital course for adopting parents called A Tale of Two Mothers. Okay. And so in her time outside of work, she's a nature enthusiast, an artist, and a mother of 2 young children, and is currently renovating a 1912 farmhouse. All right. So I'm going to bring Kathryn on. Hi, Kathryn. How are you?
Hey, Lucrece. Hi, everybody.
Thank you for joining us. So I already gave everybody your intro and told them about how awesome you are. For
Thank
all those of you who are joining us right now, leave a comment below. Let me know where you're watching from, what city and state you're watching from as well, and say hello. And also at the end of the live today, we'll have a Q&A. So if you have any questions while we're talking about 3 reasons why you should choose open adoption, put your comments below and I will go back and go over those questions. And Kathryn and I will be happy to answer your questions. All right. Also, make sure to share this live with your friends and family. Tell them that we're on right now. Anyone you know who's been looking into adoption, who has this question, who's wrestling between open and closed adoption, share this live with them so they can join the party. All right. All right. Welcome, Kathryn. I'm so glad that you could be on today so we can talk about this really important topic, which is open adoption. So tell me, how did you get into the adoption world?
Oh, how did I get into adoption? This comes up a lot because I think a lot of people who work in adoption are either adopted themselves, have adopted, or are birth parents. And I'm none of those. So I get that question a lot. And I felt for a long, long time, I wasn't quite sure why I ended up in this space, but I very firmly believe that we kind of end up where we're supposed to be. As long as we sort of listen to the messages, I think we really do end up where we're supposed to be. So I did my undergraduate degree at Syracuse, and I got my degree in psychology. I traveled a bit, and when I was traveling, we went to an orphanage, specifically one in Vietnam, and I remember there was a little girl in this like really cold, dark hallway. There weren't any adults around. It was like a really strange experience. And I'm in like my early 20s at this point. And I'm just looking around like, how is this a child's life? This makes no sense that I had such a beautiful life, a beautiful childhood. And this child gets this. It just didn't, it really was something that stayed with me after I left. And so I just really started thinking about, how can I help kids like her? Knowing now that kids like this exist, how can I help them? And I just kept coming back to adoption. So when I went back to school for my master's degree, I went to University of Pittsburgh, and I went specifically for social work to work in adoption. I thought I'd end up working in international adoption. Didn't work out that way. I think I just kept kind of leaning into the things that came in front of me that felt like it was meant to be. So, all these years go by, and then I actually found out shortly after I read Ann Fessler's book, The Girls Who Went Away, which is an incredible read. If you've not read it, please put that on your TBR list. But it's all about women who were forced to relinquish children. And I found out that my grandmother was adopted, and her mother was sent away to a maternity home in Syracuse, New York.
Oh
And the
my
home where she
goodness.
Ben was like right around the corner from school, place I saw regularly. So, and I think that it just kept feeling like this is why. And this was something for our family that no one really knew, no one talked about. This was not something anyone ever put words to, which was pretty common for, her generation. But now that I work in this space, just really helping put some of those pieces together for my family and for other families who have similar experiences has been one of the best
Wow.
parts. So that's how I got here.
Incredible. That is an incredible story. I actually really enjoy stories that are not typical. Because like I said, when you talk to people who work in this field, it's I've adopted myself or I am an adoptee, and it kind of gets like wah wah wah. I want your story to be more unique. But I am also a unique story of I have not adopted and I was not adopted. And I tell people God called me to this field. And I don't believe that everybody working in adoption should have either adopted or be adopted, because that's not a requirement for loving and wanting to help families and having a passion for families to be for children to be placed in safe homes. Can be anybody. You don't have to be adopted or have had that experience to have that heart. So I love your story, Kathryn. That is incredible. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you for all the work that you're doing now, though. That's really awesome.
I
So
love
today we want to talk about 3 reasons why you should choose open adoption. And as you know, the conversation about open versus closed adoption is something that first time hopeful adoptive parents really wrestle with sometimes. And when my experience is when families are coming in to adoption for the first time, the knee jerk reaction is to want closed adoption. And that makes sense because it's going to be my child. And there's so many feelings around the idea of feeling like you're going to be sharing your child with their biological parent and all that entails, for the rest of their lives. That can feel very daunting for families to have to wrap their minds around and to think through. And so I wanted to have you on so that you could talk to our families based on your experience with working with birth moms and listening to them about why open adoption is so powerful and important. So I think let's dive right in. So what would you say is one of the reasons, what's one reason why families should choose open adoption?
I think what you said last was that it involves birth parents, and birth parents are happier with their decisions when they have open adoption. And that for me is a huge reason, number one, why parents who are looking to adopt, should be looking at openness. The birth parent on the other end of this does better, feels more satisfied with their choice to place if they know you, trust you, get pictures that prove that their child is safe and healthy, that you're who you said you were. It makes that feeling of, did I do the right thing? It gives reassurance. Openness gives reassurance. It doesn't fix everything, it doesn't cure all the big feelings, but it certainly relieves that pressure, that stress, that panic, especially in that first year after placement for birth parents. So that is definitely my big reason, number one, why people should be thinking about openness, birth parents.
Yeah. And I guess to add to that, I would say if you put yourself in the birth mother's shoes, what would you want? I
Mhm.
would think that every mom who's, grown a baby in their tummy and is choosing to place that baby for adoption for, whatever reason, that you would want that assurance for yourself as well if you were in their shoes. So it makes sense
Mhm.
that the biological mom would want some type of assurance that, okay, I chose this family. I thought I made the right decision and I really did. So that
Yeah.
first year is solidifying her choice and being like, okay, that was a good decision. Even as she's grieving through the process, at least she can at least feel like, okay, the baby is safe, baby is okay. And then she can really grieve her decision as well without the added, I don't know, emotional toil that probably has to happen to moms who are not sure like where their child is and what's really going on. So I would imagine anybody would want that.
Yeah, I think what I found too is that for a lot of women, they'll get a photo, and that photo gives them, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 weeks of like, okay, I feel good about this. I saw my child, I saw that they're safe, I saw that they're growing. This is good. And then the feelings start to come back of, okay, but now it's been 3 weeks. What if they're not okay now?
Yeah.
What if today's different? They're a little bigger, maybe they're doing something, maybe they fell, maybe they choked on something, and they start doing this panic of, I need to make sure again that they're okay. So I think that ability to then if you have an open relationship, for birth mom to say, hey, I know I'm not due for a photo again for another week, but could you just send me a quick photo? I'm just, it would really help me. And I've been with women when they receive those photos, and you can see it. You can see the relief, like, okay, I can breathe now because I know that they're okay. So
Yeah.
it's huge.
Yeah, wow. That's incredible to think about that through the biological mom's perspective. I think it helps adoptive families to see a little bit differently and to think of it as a holistic, like we're approaching this as this is adoption is complicated and it's not just about us, right? So like one of the things that I talk to my families a lot about is you cannot approach adoption like you're approaching having your own biological child because it's not the same. They are not
Yes.
the same thing. So
Yeah.
although you're growing your family, this is the way you're choosing to do it. Adoption is not equal biological because biological, they're yours. Adoption, they're not yours though. Like we just can't think of it that way. They're not biologically yours. And so you are engrafting yourself in someone else's story and history. And you have to understand what that means and navigate that differently than you would if they were your biological child.
Yeah, I find that when we say that, I totally agree with you. That's really our whole approach, is that we have to educate, we have to prepare, because it's not the same. There are different needs, there are different relationships, there are different nuances to how that child is raised and how your family works that are different than in a biological family. But I do find that when I say that to families, especially ones who are maybe earlier on in their process, there's a lot of pushback. Families don't like that. That's really hard to hear. And I can appreciate that, right? Most
Yeah,
families have been through a whole lot to get here. I think if anyone's watching us today, they've probably been through a whole lot to get to a space to say,
right.
I'm going to adopt. And then for us to say, well, wait a minute, it's super different. There's a lot of work you need to do. I see why people do push back, but it's pretty common to get that. I don't think they're any different. They're exactly the same. It's, raising a child is raising a child. And yeah, I agree. It's lots of differences.
Yeah. And I mean, and that's why being informed is so important. Like, this is one of the things I'll be beating this horse, even though it's been dead for a long time. I cannot stress enough the importance of having the right information. Information is power. And so, especially for first time hopeful adoptive parents, that's one of the things that they have to grasp, or at least take the time to let their hearts agree with it is not the same. As much as you want it to be, like you have to open your eyes to the reality of what adoption is, because otherwise it sets yourself up for failure, it sets your child up for failure, and a whole lifetime of issues that you could spare yourself if you just accepted
Yeah.
some of the difficulties of adoption. That's just, it's like it just is what it is, and no one can change that.
Also, it's not bad. Like, in saying that
Right,
it's different, we're not saying that it's bad, or
right.
that, your child's doomed, or that you'll never bond. Like, that I think is what people then think when we say, well, it's different. And that's not what we're saying. We're just saying that the work to prepare is different and important, and kind of just lean into that space.
Yeah, yeah. And so for those of you who are joining us right now, please comment below, let me know where you're watching from, your name and the city and state you're watching from. And at the end of the live, we're going to do a quick Q&A, and Kathryn will be happy to answer your questions. So if you have questions, post it while we're talking if anything comes up, and then I'll go back over the comments and then we'll do the Q&A at the end. Okay, so just a quick reminder for all of you, and also to share this live with your friends. All right. So, what is the second reason for you that you think that families should choose open adoption?
Okay, so I think this is a great link, because we were just talking about how families are having to do all of this work to prepare. And I think it's really important then to let them know that openness actually makes this experience of raising an adopted child more satisfying for you as the adopting parent when you have openness. And I know hearing that, you're like, what? But it's true, right? All of the research, all of the data says that parents who are parenting adopted children and have openness, they feel closer to their adopted child than parents who have closed situations. It's just that environment in the home then of trust and communication and true openness around things that are hard and heavy. That happens. Those things go along with openness in adoption. So you're building this space where people can connect deeply and relate deeply. And when you have closed adoptions, there's there's a wall. There's always a wall. There's always a secret. There's always someone prohibiting someone from accessing something. That's sort of the underlying tone of closed adoptions.
Mhm.
In open adoptions, we don't have that. It's everyone sitting at the dinner table, able to share how their day was, how they're feeling, where they need support. That's what open adoption is. And so the adopting parents benefit from the
Mhm.
ability to really connect with their child in a really deep way. So it's better for adopting parents.
Yeah,
Reason
yeah.
number two.
Yeah, and I would say like that's been very consistent with adoptees as well. Adoptees that I've had the pleasure of meeting and talking with who did not know about their adoption until late in life, truly their relationship with their adoptive parents was some of them like almost didn't recover because of that. And so once the adoptive parents saw like, oh my gosh, basically that big mistake they did
Mhm.
in keeping this vital information from their child for so many years. Once they were able to, you know, say I'm sorry and kind of they were able to build a bridge. But some adoptive families never get that, which is so sad. So the danger of not having an open adoption is that your relationship as the as the adoptive parent with your adopted child could literally completely break and disappear because that's what some of the adoptees are saying like they they are like, do I even know you? All this time I was living with you and you kept a secret from me. And it has to do with their identity, with where they come from. And so when you keep that kind of information from a human, you can imagine why they wouldn't trust you. And it shatters the trust that you've built with them over the years. So I just think it's not even worth it, to
Mhm.
have like 20 something years of, building trust and relationship with your adopted child. And then all of that to come crumbling down just because you didn't tell them they were adopted or maybe you had information about their biological family and just decided not to share it because I've heard stories like that. And it really hurts your child. And it can really hurt your relationship. So we don't want that.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, if you think about it, it's like if you were talking to someone who you knew and trusted, or you thought you did, your best friend, your partner, and then you find out that they're cheating on you. All of a sudden, it's like, who are you? All
Right.
along, I thought you were this person, and now you're not. And
Right.
that's how it feels when you're speaking to your child. If you've adopted your child and you have information you're not sharing.
Mhm.
Sometimes closed is not just closed because you don't have access to birth parents, because you're not communicating with them, you're not visiting with them. Closed is that, but it's also this comes with this spirit of closure too in the home where we don't want to talk about this. We're not going to tell you were adopted. We're not going to answer your questions about it. So you create this space where your child then finds this information, and that veil, it opens, and it's suddenly, who are you? That's not who you were my whole life, and now you're someone else, and that destroys relationships. And it happens a lot. I think
Yeah.
it's easy to say, well, that sure, it happens, but that's definitely, the rare occasion, but it's not, it
Yeah.
happens so often. So yeah, protecting your child, protecting the integrity of your relationship with your child, that's what openness gives you. So
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's super important. It's super important. I think we talk a little bit too about why people don't do openness, and we'll talk a little bit about this later as well. But that's why we made our course A Tale of Two Mothers, because the
Yeah.
reason why families don't want openness is because they're afraid of it. And I
Yes.
think if they knew reason number two, it's actually better for adopting parents to have openness. I think that um, the need to hold on to that fear and make decisions based on fear would definitely evaporate.
Yeah.
But I think that's a huge piece of why we see it happen so much. Again, makes
Yeah.
sense, right? We understand why it happens. We just want to see it. People get the information they need to not make these choices that are then going to harm them
Yeah.
in perpetuity, really.
Right. Right. Well, yeah, this is a good time for you to tell everybody about your course. You said it's called A Tale of Two Mothers, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So we created this course because in working, primarily we do home studies. So I do Pennsylvania family home studies. We've been doing that for 13 years, and I was having the same conversations with families because I would ask them during home study about openness. What do you envision the relationship being like with birth parent? How do you envision naming this child? Do you want to meet mom? Do you want to have visits with mom? What do you envision that looking like? And then we would be having questions about their preferences. What type of child do you feel like you're a good fit for? And when we were having all these questions, all of their answers were driven by fear. And when I could connect those dots and see what was happening, I started putting resources on top of it, right? I started saying, okay, well, I see what's going on. So let me give you more information. But what I finally realized was that that fear didn't go away with more information. We really needed a way to look that fear in the face and say, where did you come from? And how did you get here? And how can I release you? So we created this course in an effort to give families this resource to do that work, so that then the other information that, the stuff we're talking about today, they can see that from a lens of, I don't have to be afraid in this space, and I can really lean into this information. And then everything changed, everything. So all of this content is in our course, A Tale of Two Mothers, and it's all about the power dynamics between birth and adoptive families, how they relate to one another, where that pressure is to assert, this is my child, I make the decisions. All of that stuff is addressed in our course. It's available on our website, two-mothers at absoluteloveadoptions.com. It's an 8-hour course. You can take it in increments. You don't have to sit there for 8 hours, self-paced. And the best part is that there's a workbook that goes along with it. I'm a licensed master's level social worker, and I spent a lot of time really curating the questions for the workbook so that the content we taught could then really be practiced in the workbook. And really the results we're finding from the families that take it is that they have a really radical shift in how they perceive their own fear, motherhood, how they envision their family looking, lots of work in grief and loss, letting go of space where maybe infertility has really taken up a lot of energy for people. I think that's a really common experience for families coming to adoption. So our course is really meant to get to those really deep spaces where we need to look so that we can have really healthy adoptions later. So that's our course. We'd love if you'd look at
Yeah,
it.
yeah. So I'm gonna have your contact information will be in the description box below the YouTube video, so people can contact you. So Kathryn Russell, she is on Absolute Adoptions. I believe that's the name of the agency, right? Where you do the home studies. Yeah. So I have
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
Instagram and then your email. Yeah, and then the
Yeah.
website there. So you guys can go
Yeah.
there to contact Kathryn if you live in Pennsylvania and you need a home
Mm-hmm.
study. Now you guys have a resource that you can call to do your home study. So make sure you check her out. But I think that's just really incredible because it is so needed for families as they prepare for adoption. For me, this is what preparing for adoption looks like. It's not doing your home study. It's doing this
Yeah.
type of work because
Yeah.
when you're on social media, when you're on Google, what you'll see everywhere is people telling you the first thing you need to do is do your home study, do your home study. And when you're starting your adoption, you may feel like, I just want a baby, I just want a child. And so you just want to kind of jump into it and start taking all the steps you need to take to bring the child home. The problem with that is because adoption is complex, there's so much that needs to be learned for your mindset to be in the right place, for you to actually set yourself up for a successful adoption takes time. So I don't ever recommend families when they're saying we want to adopt, I don't ever tell them just to go do your home study. I tell them it's better for you to actually invest your finances in good education and information because ultimately what that's going to do is give you a firm foundation. It's going to it's going to help you. I mean, all these other families that are just doing their home studies, it's going to help you when you start your adoption journey. You'll be so much better, like well off, and you'll save so much time, so much heartache, and just so much money, even just
Mm-hmm.
taking the time now to set this proper foundation to so that you're better equipped moving forward. So my thing with families is I know that a lot of families are thinking, oh my gosh, I have to spend $45,000 on my newborn adoption. I don't have enough money left over to get educated. And I'm like, it's kind of like saying, this is the way I say it as a lawyer. I want to be a lawyer and I want to spend all my time helping these families, but I don't want to go to law school. It's a waste of my time to go to law school. Nobody's going to give you a degree if you don't go to law school, right? Like there's so many things in life that we know we have to invest in the education and the information we need so that we can be successful. I want to bring that to adoption. And I believe that the education is vital. It's
Yeah.
like almost like people need to go through adoption university, get a
Yes.
degree before
Yes.
you adopt, because there's so much you need to know that's going to set you up for success. And it's worth the investment and the time. So yeah,
Yeah.
what
And
are your thoughts on that, Kathryn?
I agree. And I think also a lot of times families who come right to me and say, we're ready to adopt, our attorney sent us here for a home study. They don't quite know that they're ready to adopt. And sometimes we'll do, they pay for their home study and we're halfway through our process and families will say, I don't think this is for us. I didn't realize what this really would mean. I thought we were just getting a child. I thought it was like, these were check boxes and we would move on. So
Right.
I've certainly had families who spend the money for a home study and then do not move forward, not because I don't approve them, because they just decide it's not for them.
Right.
So when you're talking about, spending money so that you can be sure, it's so important, right? Before you get a home study, start that learning process.
Yeah.
I think also we have a really big problem in the adoption industry of educating families. There's no consistent format for education. There's no requirements for hours in many states. I mean, I'm in Pennsylvania and we have literally 0 education hours required, which is insane.
Yeah.
We're not the only state. There are definitely a handful that have 0 hours, which means you can make it through this whole process knowing nothing. And imagine, I mean, you and I know what this looks like inside. Imagine getting on the other side of this and then starting to put the pieces together of what it really means. It's not good. It's not good.
Yeah.
So
And
it's,
even worth spending money, because
yeah,
families at that time have spent thousands of dollars and then they feel they want to give up on the process because they just didn't know so much before they spend all this money. So this is kind of where I come in to fill that gap. And where for you guys on YouTube, maybe who have never heard of me before, or those who have followed me for a while, what I do is I provide the Adoption Success Accelerator program. And so what it is that it's an unbiased, streamlined source of everything that you need to know for a successful adoption before you start the process, during the process, and also after you bring that child home. Because after is almost, I think, more important than before, because after is forever.
mhm,
So after, and I also personally guide you through the process based on my experience as an adoption lawyer, helping hundreds of families through the process. So that's what I noticed too when I kind of started understanding more about newborn adoption. There's just a big gap that families are just kind of falling through the cracks and they're spending so much money, losing so much time because they just don't have the information. So if that's you and you are a first-time hopeful adopted parent and you're thinking, yeah, I have no idea what I'm doing, my friend on Facebook told me to do a home study and I already called an agency and I'm starting it, I would say just halt. um, in the description box below, you'll see a link where you can actually book a call with me and we can talk about if the program is the best suit for you, the best fit for for your family. But that is what I provide, and that's how I help families to become well informed so that they can successfully adopt. Okay, it's so important.
yeah, can't say it enough. It is the foundation of this process. So go all in on education. There's lots of great resources. I
Yeah.
think also when you're choosing a program like Lucrece has, you are knowing that she screened these resources, right? So I think sometimes we get lost in Google, pulling
Yeah.
some resources that are maybe more dangerous to our process than helpful. So I think
Yeah.
it's also really important to make sure the resources you're pulling are current, that they are created by somebody with a degree, a license, some reason why they're in this field. They've gone to school to be able to, pass this information on. I think those are really important things to say too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, Catherine, what would you say is the third reason why families should choose open adoption? So,
The
actually, let me
adoption,
recap really quick. So, we
yeah,
said the first one was it gives birth moms this sense of, okay, I made the right decision. It gives them peace of mind. My child is okay. When they see pictures, especially for the first year, when they see pictures of the child, when they're hearing from you, it solidifies the piece of, okay, I made a good decision when I chose this family and my child is okay. So that was the first reason. Second reason was it's good for you as the adoptive family. It actually helps your relationship with you if you adopt a child when you keep that openness so that if so that you don't have this huge rift or drift in your relationship with your adopted child later down the road.
well summarized.
Yeah.
I
Yes.
agree. So I'd say number three is the adopted person. And I think in this space, for someone who's looking for information, looking to figure out how to do this well, how to do openness well, I think listening to people who have been adopted is the place to go.
Mhm.
I think that lots of decisions are made for a person in adoption. You know, the adoptee is being, all of the decisions are being made for them. They can't consent to any of this, but it directly impacts the entirety of their life in so many ways.
Right.
So I think listening to adopted people who are pretty unanimously saying openness would have helped me thrive, or openness is helping me thrive,
Right.
it can't be more clear. We know for certain that, again, openness doesn't undo the wound of adoption. It doesn't make all of the extra work needed or the extra nuances or just the things that are different. Those don't go away because you have openness,
Yeah.
but the amount of inner conflict that an adopted person experiences is by and large reduced when you have openness. And I think it's important to note that that's two different kinds of openness. It's openness in actually seeing and knowing and having true relationship with birth family. That's a huge piece of it. But it's also openness around the way you speak about adoption. That spirit that adoption is a positive thing, that we are a family who talks about these things, that we are open about conversation in our home, that if a child mentions their birth parent and saying, you know, I really missed my birth mom today, that the adoptive family isn't saying, what? Am I not good enough? Why are you saying that? Right? Like
Right.
that's not happening in families who have really good openness. So I
Right.
think openness in general it means more than one thing. It means more than
Mhm.
just, you know, I see birth family, I talk to birth family. So I think
Yeah.
it's important for people who are in this process to know that and to learn a little bit about that. And I think it's really important that we say that the statistics for adopted people on how often they access mental health supports and how often they have experiences with attempting suicide is actually quite higher than the non-adopted population. And that's scary. I think that when we think about that, if you were not allowed to know who you are inside, you know, who you came from, where you came from, the origin of your biology, like if we were not allowed to know that and you were sort of asked to just pretend it didn't happen, I can see where a person would start to feel like, I don't know who I am. And how do you live a life when you don't know who you are?
Right.
So I think we know that openness helps relieve that feeling of who am I? Where did I come from? How did I get here? So for
Right.
certain, an openness is better for adopted people in so many ways, so many.
Right.
But those are some big ones.
Wow. I mean, it's huge. I think too, like as families, maybe as families are looking into adoption, if you've never been, obviously, if you were not adopted, it's so hard for us to grasp the concept of not knowing our biological family because we never had to not know our biological family.
Yeah.
And to actually sit for a minute and think through, like, what if I didn't know who my grandma was? What if I didn't know who my dad was? What if I didn't know who my sisters were, my siblings? Because some birth mothers have, a couple of children, and then they decide after the third or fourth they want to place that third or fourth for adoption. So some adopted children have siblings, right?
Mhm.
Like biological siblings. If you actually like sit for a minute and imagine that whole part of your life, like you got to go to grandma's house, eat cookies, Christmas, like that was never there. It just like vanishes. And think about how that would feel like to walk through life and to live never knowing that biological side of your family. Of course, adoption is different, right? In the sense of the biological mother chose placement for adoption, but the adopted child didn't, right? So they still want to know, who is my grandma really? Like, who
Yeah.
do I look like? Whose nose do I have? Because
Yeah.
for us, we know all of these things because we grew up with it.
Yeah.
But one of the tragedies with adoption is that adoptive children, they can't see their reflection through their adoptive family. And so it's hard for them to know, like, I belong here.
Yeah.
Yes, you love me, but I don't feel like I belong. And it's
Yeah.
hard for adoptive families to grasp that. If you've never been adopted, it's not something that you can really you can't sit in that with them and really feel it.
Yeah.
And so this is why it's so important to be open and to give them the resources that they need so that
Yeah.
they can talk through with a counselor. They can hopefully have adoptee support groups so they have peers that
Mhm.
understand them, where they feel this camaraderie, like, okay, you understand where I'm coming from. I'm not crazy. It's not just me. But I love how this conversation has been about all the members of the triad, open adoption helps. It
Yeah.
helps the birth mom, it helps the adoptive parents, and it also helps the adopted child. And so, gosh, that's just amazing how you brought it full circle, Kathryn. I think that's really powerful.
It would make it hard for a person not to want to learn about openness, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, everybody has to learn about it. And so I have a comment here. Carl D says, wouldn't having a closed adoption by giving the child the choice to know their biological parents is a safer way to go? Can't there be risk in original families knowing where their kids are at? That's a great question. And that is one of the questions that families have. So, Kathryn, what do you think?
Here's my take on this. Why are we assuming that it's not safe? I think when we're talking about especially domestic infant adoption, it's very different than state services, child welfare. In I think that's one of the big distinctions we have to make. In child welfare, the assumption is that the child was being hurt or was could be hurt, harmed, neglected. That's why they can't stay. We know that. So feeling like you want to protect that child makes sense. In private domestic adoption, that's not what happens. By and large, women are choosing adoption because they feel that they can't give their child something that they want their child to have. A
Right.
lot of times these are women who are in college and they don't want to be parents yet. They're not ready for that. I've worked with women who had all of the support in the land, financially stable, had good relationships, and just did not want to be a parent. So we're making an assumption about that woman that she's unsafe when we don't know anything about her. But that theory, that philosophy of who birth parents are, that lens is how we're seeing openness. So if we think that birth parents are bad and scary and doing dangerous things, of course we're going to think closed makes more sense. I think the second part of saying closing it, but then giving them the choice to know their family later. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes that happens because birth parents ask for that. Sometimes that happens because, maybe a birth parent dies. Lots of things happen where you can't physically have openness. So we do need to make space for that yes, in situations like that, it's closed. It's kind of against your choice, but it's closed. And so giving your child the ability to know their family is absolutely the best way to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Carl
You
says,
see the comment? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And
yeah,
yeah, Carl, that's a really good question because closed versus open adoption, that conversation really, you only have to talk about that really when it comes to newborn adoption. So I'm actually really glad that you brought up this because we do need to talk about it. One of the things that I've found in America in general is that when you say the word adoption, people just immediately jump to newborn adoption for some reason. But as an adoption lawyer, having done adoptions for almost a decade, there are so many different types of adoptions. And so it always baffles me when I say adoption, people just think baby.
yeah,
Well, I mean, there's step parent adoptions, there's relative adoptions, foster care adoptions, international adoptions, adult adoptions. There are
yeah,
so many different types of adoptions. So for me, coming from that experience, talking about adoption, I'm always thinking, what type of adoption are we talking about? Okay,
yes,
let's hone it in and then let's
clarify.
talk about that specific type of adoption. So, Carl, that was a great question because open versus closed adoption really doesn't have a merit in foster care adoptions, for example, because at that point, the biological parents' rights have been terminated. And so for foster care adoption specifically, it's up to the adoptive parents if they still think, okay, well, we still want the biological parents to have a relationship somehow. And if it's safe, we'll allow it to be that way. So for foster care, it's a completely different conversations. International adoption is the same way. Usually in international adoptions, it's just closed, right? Because a lot of times the children were abandoned, we can't find the parents. So it's kind of like a de facto closed adoption when you're adopting internationally. But I actually have a friend who adopted two teenagers from Haiti, and they actually have an open adoption
Mhm.
because the family was okay with the adoption. The kids were in the orphanage just because the family couldn't afford it. And so my friend, they kept the adoption open. And so their two sons still talk to their family once a week at least in Haiti. And
Mhm.
that's a rare case, but even in international adoption, you can still have an open adoption where you have conversations with the biological family, which I think is incredible that she's doing that. And then, there's other types of, step parent adoptions, for example, I do a lot of those. And sometimes the biological parent who's relinquishing their rights, they want to keep a relationship post adoption. And so you could consider that an open adoption. So all that to say, we can literally talk about this subject forever, but for the purposes of it, I just wanted to be clear that we were talking in this live specifically about newborn baby adoptions,
Mhm.
because that's where people really have a struggle with open adoption versus closed adoption, you know. But yeah, Carl says that makes sense. Yeah, yeah, I know it can be confusing because there's so many different types of adoptions, and people
Yeah.
kind of fly that word around everywhere, and sometimes you don't even know what type of adoption you're talking about. But
I think it's also interesting because I hear that idea too in domestic infant adoption about well, maybe they're afraid really of the birth parents, and if it's not safe, then our child shouldn't know their family. But what happens is that when your child can legally go find their family on their own, what they find is often that they weren't scary and it wasn't dangerous. It was just the adopting family's fear creating the story. And I think sometimes that makes the child fear who they are, because
Mhm.
if the adoptive family is so afraid of the birth family that they're saying they're dangerous, they're bad, they're a lot
Mhm.
of this happens around like addiction,
Mhm.
living on the streets, prostitution, incarceration. A lot of negative talk happens around women who are engaged in any of those lifestyles. But if you're
Mhm.
telling your child that your family's not safe and you can't know them, you're also telling your child that they were born to people who aren't safe. And what does that say about them? So I think we definitely have to have those conversations in domestic infant. It just looks definitely different than the other types of adoption that Lucrece was mentioning.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. I think it even bleeds into foster care adoption, though, honestly, because as we all know, foster care adoption is, we know it's abuse and neglect. Something happened to where the parents' rights had to be forcibly terminated. I mean, some relinquish, but a lot of times it's a termination of parental rights. But even then, my husband and I were foster parents, and I mean, it is scary when you have parents who are neglecting their children, and you just want to protect whatever child is in your home, whether they're biologically yours or not. That's just an instinct as a parent. But still, even in that, what I find is foster kids who are adopted, and let's say their adoptive parents never, you know, let them see their biological family or whatever, they still want to have a
Mhm.
relationship with their biological family, even if there was addiction,
Yeah.
because it's not about the things that the family went through. It's about the search for identity. That's what they're looking for.
Mhm.
And so I actually had a friend who she was adopted and she chose not to have a relationship. She was the one who chose not to have a relationship. But eventually she went to find out. I think she was about 21. She decided, okay, I'm 21 now. I'm going to go and find out more about this biological family that I never wanted to know about. And
Mhm.
she found out all these scary things. And she was like, oh my gosh, my biological family is so dysfunctional. I don't want anything to do with them. But
Yep,
at
that
that point,
happens.
it was her decision because she
Yes.
grew up in a healthy family. Her adoptive family was very open with her, like, do you want to go see them? Like, we'll drive you. She was like, no, 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 no. So when she was an adult and she like, so what I mean is that kids, as they grow up, when you teach them healthy, they know what unhealthy is.
Yes.
So even if the biological family is unhealthy, when they figure that out, they'll know to put up boundaries and to say, yeah, I just kind of wanted to know you, but you're a little weird. Like you're crazy for me.
Yeah.
I
That
don't
is
ever want to have that kind of relationship with you.
yeah, I love how you
They
said
can
that.
make, yeah, they
Yeah.
can make their own choice at that point versus you making it for them.
Yeah, I think that goes back to openness too. I've heard a lot of stories from adopted people who said that they didn't necessarily want to search for birth family. They didn't really have an interest in it, which I think everyone's different. They all handle
Yeah.
it differently.
Mhm.
But there are lots of people who say their adoptive parents made them feel like they had to choose. So if they wanted to find birth family, they weren't allowed to entertain that. So they kind of suppressed
Oh,
that.
goodness, wow.
And then when they did go to look, their adoptive family was angry at them for looking. And that, of course, makes that rift happen, not with birth family, but with adoptive family. So I
Right.
think what you said is, people, if you're raising a child to know what safe is, they'll identify that in the world. I think we also really have to be mindful that we need to teach our children that their decisions are theirs to make. And they can't hold us as, I don't want to upset mom, so I'm not going to do this. We really
Right.
have to give them space to make their own choices about that.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, this was such a powerful conversation. Um, for those of you who have been thinking about open versus closed adoption, the other comment that I wanted to make about that, which may, I don't know, it may be a surprise to you as an adoptive family. But what I tell families too regarding this topic is you may choose closed adoption, But really, at the end of the day, the birth mom is the one making the choice. And this is what I mean by that. When you are being presented, your profile is being presented to birth moms, they already know what they want. If they want open adoption and you want closed adoption, they're not going to choose you. That's just, at the end of the day, that's just what's going to happen. Obviously, some birth moms do want to close adoption for whatever reason, that's what they want. And so the way that kind of the adoption trends are going, more and more birth moms want to have an open adoption. They want to have some type of relationship, whether it's a letter once a year, pictures once a month, whatever that looks like. And so if you decide, no, closed adoption is what I want, you are really doing yourself a disservice, because that means that all these birth moms who want to open adoption will never consider your profile.
Yep.
And so that's another thing that I like adoptive parents to just kind of consider as well. You are like, you can decide I want closed adoption, but really birth mom is the one who holds the cards, because she's the one choosing the type of family that she feels comfortable with. So if you're choosing closed adoption, she's not going to feel comfortable with you. So just another thing for adoptive families to keep in mind when it comes to that topic. Okay, we have one question from Impress. Can I adopt a child although I live in the Bahamas? Well, Impress, are you a United States citizen who is just temporarily living in the Bahamas, or are you a citizen of the Bahamas? That would be the question. I actually plan on having a guest in the next couple of weeks or so, an organization who actually helps U.S. citizens who live abroad adapt in the United States, which is really amazing. There's so many amazing resources for families. So Impress, if that's you, I can just, send you their contact. But if you're a U.S. citizen, no, she says she's Bahamian. So the best thing for you to do is to adapt in the country you're in. That's just easier for anyone. You can adapt internationally, but you just have to find the right agency to help you. But otherwise, if you're in the Bahamas, I would think adapting from the Bahamas would probably be a lot easier for you than trying to adapt from the United States. So I hope that answers that question. But Kathryn, did you have any closing remarks for us about open adoption and just your work with birth families and also working with adoptive families through the home study process?
Yeah, I think one sort of really important thought, but our kind of closing thought, is that when you're deciding what you want and what it looks like, it's scary because you don't know who's on the other end of it. So it's scary to say, I want openness with a literal stranger.
Right.
Yeah, I get it if you're reserved. Yes. But you're going to know this person. You're going to build a relationship like you would any other friend that you meet that deepens over time. So the expectation that you go all in right away and are like, exchanging Christmas gifts in each other's homes, that's probably not the reality for most open relationships, even very open. Lots of people get there, but it's generally after years of knowing one another. So I think making sure people know that what we're talking about, we're not saying that this is like go in and it's going to be perfect. It's growth. Things change, feelings change, lives change. But give yourself space to grow over time in relationship with your child's birth parent.
Yeah, and that's a really good comment. Yeah. I was going to share a quick story before we end the live tonight about a lady that I met. I did a podcast with her probably a couple months ago now. She's an adoptive mom. So they adopted their first child and then she became pregnant and then they had their second child biologically. And so she's very funny, but she was telling the story about how they're so open with adoption. Like they talk about it in the house all the time. Like it's just so normal that her biological child wishes that she was adopted. And so she will just like make up these stories about like how, she's like, gosh, mom, I wish I was adopted. Can I be adopted too?
Yeah.
My sister is adopted. I want to be like, she thinks it's
special.
the coolest thing to be adopted because they made the conversation it's just a part of their lives.
Yeah.
I just thought that was the cutest thing. And just really, it's a testament to how when you are open with your children and with your family, just how, her adopted child feels so normal to the point where even she's like, do we have to go to another adoption thing? Like, they're just already. It's just so normal that it doesn't feel awkward. It doesn't feel weird. It's like, this is just a part of my story. Just like I was born in South Dakota in the hospital, whatever. They're like, yep, I was adopted,
That's great.
Yeah. And maybe I should have her on so she can tell her story because it's such a beautiful story and hopefully to encourage other families that And the other part of her story, which I thought was amazing, was that mom was having a rough time and she wasn't safe for a time. And so she kind of walked us through how she navigated through that, to where she basically just told her mom, I'm here for you and I want to help you, but right now it's just not safe. So we can send pictures or whatever, but as soon as you're at a place where we can, whatever, again, we're happy. And so she said it took about 1.5 years, but mom really kind of got her act together and then came back and they restarted the relationship. I thought that is like formidable. That is amazing.
Yeah.
So now that I'm talking about her, I should have her on. I think it would be a really great story for
Yeah.
adopted families to know that it's
Yeah.
it's
That's
okay.
beautiful.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's beautiful. But yeah, for all of you who hopped on tonight, thank you for watching the live tonight. Don't forget again to share this with your friends. And again, I'd love to work with you all. So if you are a first-time hopeful adoptive parent and you just don't even know what to do, you're getting all this information from Google, you feel so confused, overwhelmed. It's normal to feel overwhelmed. You're not the only one. Again, my biggest recommendation as an adoption lawyer, doing this for almost a decade, is invest in wisdom, invest in information that's going to help you get clarity on the process, help you get your foundation right so that you don't lose a lot of time and money that you shouldn't have to lose. And so if you want to work with me through the accelerator, the link is going to be in the description box. You can click on it, apply. I'd love to talk to you more about if we're a good fit. And don't forget to check out Kathryn Russell with Absolute Love Adoptions. She's on Instagram, like I said. I'm going to put all her contact information in the description box as well. So you guys can go check her out, and especially check out her course that she talked about tonight, because it's going to help you so much to understand open adoption. I mean, she only gave us a little bit tonight about 3 reasons why you should choose open adoption, but her course goes into so much more detail. And so that's something where you're struggling right now to really decide, like, gosh, do I really need to do open adoption? Definitely check out her course so that you can get that matter settled in your heart before you move forward. Okay. So thank you all for being on here tonight, and I'll see you on the next live. Thank you for being here, Kathryn.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Bye, everybody. Have a good night.